Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here one more time. And it's great to see all the frontline heroes around the Atlantic region to support newcomers, immigrants, refugees, people like me as either as immigrants and also as a newcomer myself to integrate into the society. And really truly appreciate this opportunity to be back to give this wonderful PD session for our for Swiss professionals. So just let me share my screen here. So today, as Olivia mentioned, we are going to talk about the high emotion communication and de-escalation for Swiss professionals. And before we get started, whenever we gather, I would like to acknowledge that we are in the Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of Mi'kmaq. We recognize and acknowledge the peace and friendship treaties signed between the British Crown and Mi'kmaq in this territory, Halifax Regional Municipality, and we recognize that we are all treaty people. We also want to recognize, especially last month is African Heritage Month. I want to also recognize that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people who, whose histories, the legacies, and also their contributions have enriched that part of Mi'kmaq, known as Nova Scotian, for over 400 years. So that's me, either as a settler and as an immigrant. With the training today, we will explore different perspectives, different ideas that sometimes might be far from your comfort zone, let's say. Or sometimes the information might be a little bit different from your initial ideas. But you know what? That is a perfect time for newcomers and for adult learners to adapt, to be resilient, reflective, receptive to new ideas, new knowledge. So, moving out of the training today, I would just appreciate your opening, your welcoming ideas, similar to the land acknowledgement, to see the world from different perspectives and show our respect to all the culture, all the knowledge we have. So before we dive in, just want to tell a little bit about myself. So who am I? For folks who saw me or who knew me from the previous sessions, I'm quite active in the Halifax communities. First thing first, I am the Nonviolent Crisis Intervention Certified Instructor with Crisis Prevention Institute back to 2023, like 3 years ago in Boston. So I got certified as an instructor to offer the training for the municipal staff. So I've offered over, my God, 54 sessions to over almost 600 participants just within our organization. And most of them are all frontline staff, transit, parks and recreation, library, um, and all the planning development, ferry mates, also the counselors. Like we're trying to expand the skills for frontline heroes to give them the skill to provide and de-escalate um, uh, techniques and also to stay rationally detached in those conversations. I'm also a mental health first aid trainer. For folks who know me, I'm active in offering mental health first aid trainings across Nova Scotia, and I'm also an assist trainer, applied suicide intervention skills training. So one in offer that mental health first aid in Vancouver and then the assist in Newfoundland. So it's like two coastals in Canada. But with that in mind, you see, I'm trying to expand my capacity and my expertise, my understanding to support people, either safeguarding someone's life, support people with mental health challenges, and also de-escalate with all those high emotion conversations. And that's my focus here. My role with the municipality is leading the whole community safety education program, just to expand the capacity to, and also the we call this the spectrum of responses to emergencies and crises. You know, we want to change people's mind. We want to change the social status. It starts from change people's minds, their thoughts, their initial conversation. And by doing this, it starts from education. So I have my full passion in offering teaching components, all the programs, projects to help others. And that's my previous 10 plus years experience in education. I'm also a Master of Education from Mount St. Vincent University. I'm also the alumni board with them at the moment. So if you're the alumni, yes, welcome. Hello. So before we dive in, before we really touch base into those, sensitive conversations, I just want to do like a quick, a brief arrival exercise. I've read our staff report from Swiss, from Marisa, and I really want to acknowledge that I see for not firsthand, but I see how Swiss work often moves very quickly. We carry many conversations and responsibilities with us. So let's just take a short moment to check in with ourselves. So in a few seconds, I will ask everyone to do 3 deep breaths with me. We often thinking about others, so this is a time for us just to be honest with ourselves. So when we do our first deep breath, let's switch our idea to our head and be honest with us. What thoughts are you carrying into this session? Acknowledge it. It could be doing my chores, taking care of my kids, what's for breakfast, what's for dinner, what we are going to do for March break, or any work, any deadlines. So let's be honest, what thoughts are you carrying into this session? Then we'll move on to our heart. What emotions and feelings are present for you right now? It could be, relaxed, calm, agitated, anxious, worried, overwhelmed. Let's acknowledge our feelings and our thoughts. And then the third deep breath, let's move on ourselves to our feet. So stay grounded, make your heel and your toes to feel the ground, the grounding, the ground, the gravity, and ask yourself, how do you want to participate? It could be either participant or a pilot, lead the conversation, give input, or you can be the prisoner, I was told to be here. Like, I don't care about this training at all. And that's okay. We'll acknowledge that. And also the other part could be a passenger, you just dive in, go with the flow. You may dive in more conversations or you just like tap out, like I'm done. We can be honest. Remember, this place we create is what I call a safe space or a brave space because people always say there's no 100% brave space. So in this spatial learning atmosphere, I want to create this brave space so you feel safe, either emotionally, psychologically, and physically before we get started. Okay? So please follow my lead and let's take a first deep breath and thinking about your head. What thoughts are you carrying into this session? Let's take a deep breath. Inhale and exhale. What's on your mind? Okay. Now let's take a second deep breath and thinking about your heart. What emotions and feelings you carry are the present for now. So inhale and exhale. Okay. Acknowledge your thoughts, your feelings, and now let's move on to our feet. How do you want to participate? And let's be honest and sincere to ourselves. So inhale and exhale. Okay. You know, those exercises, breathing exercises, is a great tool to bring you back to the present. Swift works often involves with all the supporting students and families, especially during those emotional complex moments. in those high emotion conversations, or our ability to regulate ourselves often shapes the outcome of the interaction. And that's how I always say, in those escalated conversations, the communication is not just one like a skill set. It becomes a continuum. It can be improved with more trainings, more self-care, but sometimes it could be lessened because of our limited cognitive functioning, our daily stress, our own trauma, lots of different moving pieces. So now it's a great practice just to bring yourself back to the moment. So for today, we will go over some high level learning points. So the first part I want to share according to study. So for all the exercises we have here, all the slides I'm sharing today, it's all evidence-based. I'm not just giving those flippant comment or those false information. So and the slides I'm sharing today includes the evidence-based research. So first thing first, we will understand why emotions rise for the frontline heroes, frontline work, and how escalation usually develops. Understand the brain, how brain works. I know most of you have learned about the fight, flight, freeze, but behind our brain, how the brain does the brain works and how we respond with those behavior. The second one I mentioned here is the Pearl arc in real interactions. So when I say Pearl arc, it is a framework that I developed from the mental health first aid training, the NCI training, and also the assisted training. So I'm using my personal experience and expertise to come up with this framework to guide you how people communicate their emotions and what are the best staff responses. Excuse me. Then the third part for our exercise today is to apply those what we call the verbal, paraverbal, and also the nonverbal strategies to support de-escalation. But when you're talking about de-escalation, it's not just the word we choose. There's not like one just magical word or um, the magic wine, like we can just de-escalate. It contains two different ways of communication, and we'll dive into that for today. And after that, we will use some simple scripts not to pause, to redirect, and set those respectful boundaries. We are the frontline staff, and we don't want to lose our boundaries. We become only to the recipients or the punch bag. They just express their feelings and thoughts to us. So how can we positively set the boundary and show our sincere respect, maximize safety, minimize harm? That's the fourth bullet point we'll focus on. And last but not least, I also want to touch base on those reflections on staff responses and also as a whole team for the Swiss professionals, how we can learn from those escalated conversations, high emotions, and what are the best practices, the toolboxes, the skill sets, the debriefing we can learn from those conversations. So that will be the agenda for today, for the 3 hours, less than 3 hours exercise. And I'm really, really passionate and showing my sincere care to the session today. All right. So the next slide I want to share is according to study. There's a study from WHO, World Health Organization. They're talking about community mental health services. There is a frontline reality. Most of the time, the frontline workers happens where we're not just putting our support to our staff or to our clients, to the family, to the students. Sometimes we have to thinking about the whole caveats, the background, where the stress is very high, where the systems are complex to navigate. And also, according to the different cultures the newcomers are carrying forward, the needs sometimes are urgent. And we are sometimes put into those urgencies to solve and to support some issues. And where most of the time our resources are very limited. And it's not just ourselves. It's for the mostly the whole frontline workers in the community mental health services or the community supports. We are facing the same frontline reality. So here is a question I want to ask you. You can use raise your hand function. I just want to see how this relates to you. Please raise your hand if you supported or you are supporting a student or family who was emotionally overwhelmed in your care. Okay, I saw a few hands ups. Okay, and the other one, thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. Please raise your hand if you navigate a conversation across a language barrier without interpretation, like you were just sent to that conversation. And you don't have any conversation you have the conversation without any like interpretation. You have to get over those language barrier. Okay, wow. A few hands ups. Okay, keeps coming up. Thank you so much. Wow. Wow, quite a few. All right. Thanks for sharing. The third question is thinking about how you respond. When you feel responsible for de-escalating a situation, please raise your hand. Like you will feel like, oh my God, I'm responsible for those de-escalating in those high emotion conversations. Okay. Mm, okay, another few hands ups. Thank you. And last but not least, that's for yourself. After every conversation, support our clients, the students, their families. Raise your hand if you carried or are carrying the emotional weight of a difficult conversation after it ends. Whoa. Okay. Thank you so much. Wow. Still keeps coming up. Wow. Thanks. Thanks everyone for showing your vulnerability. Um, Truly appreciate that. I hear you. I hear all the potential challenges you may have. I usually, like before, I also have my previous work experience I used to work with the public school education system. I worked for private sectors like language schools. I also worked for iSense um, before I started my role with HRM with the municipality. So I firsthand saw the challenges. Um, Sometimes, the emotional burnouts. And also, we call this the vicarious trauma a person may carry over for the frontline staff. And what does this mean to you? Here, the reason why I asked is because sometimes, supporting the students and families, it often means we navigating their stresses, we navigate the uncertainty, and also the strong emotions in the real time. And we are not just helping the person to integrate into the school works, but we're also supporting them in those high emotion conversations. And most of the time, according to study, in those high stress conversations, the stress changes our communication. Under those pressures, our thinking becomes narrow, the emotions become stronger, the words becomes harder to communicate, and our reactions becomes faster. So that is the four like most common responses in our stress conversation. And what does it mean to you? It means this the stress, most of the time it shifts the brain from reasoning to survival. And here is this strategy I want to share. We've heard about those words, either fight, flight, or freeze, and also how brain responses. And here I'm trying to explain this in a more easier way to help you understand. Most of the time, our brain is not responding, mm, you know, f randomly. And also the people is not always communicating their behaviors like 24/7 with those heightened emotions, asking those challenging questions, intimidation, release their emotion, or refuse your requests. But how could this happen? Actually, it comes from initially our brain. Our brain is protecting us from those real or perceived as a challenge or a threat. And in another word, our brain usually it evolves from the harsh world. We were trained to respond, to those monsters, to fight. Or if that situation is too much, like we run away. So that's how our brain is framed. And sometimes if that situation is too much, it's hard to understand, or it's hard for us to cope with. We just totally shut down. And also our previous life experiences and also the traumas, the cognitive functioning, those are all pieces of different factors that will change how our brain reacts, sometimes more faster to those heightened emotions. So in here, I do have a great book to recommend. I also cited some of the takeaways from the book. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. So this book is written by a clinical doctor who's focusing on um, traumatic post PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and also focusing on how our brain reacts to those what we call uh, triggers. And the results shows that all the experiences we have before carried forward, and our brain will quickly react to those previous behaviors when those emotional or environmental factors are similar to your previous experience. So with that in mind, want to use another easier way to teach and to show you how the brain works. Again, this is according to the study by Dr. Sergel. So this is the hand model of the brain. You can also do this with you and also with your kids. I know you're supporting the students from a specific youth group, the youth, the teenagers, the adolescents, the young adults. And we can also use this to communicate with them. So assuming this is your hand, this is your brain with our hand. The bottom part, is a vagus nerve. So that is the largest, we call this parasympathetic nerve system, or let's just call this nerve system, the vagus nerve. It sends all the feelings to every parts of our body. It spreads across our spine, to our organs, our guts. So what it does is to make us to remain calm, feel safe, make us feel at the present, being rational. Connects with the vagus nerve is, as you can see, like the bottom of our palm is the brain stem. It controls our hearts, the heartbeats, the lungs, so we can breathe, our hearts beats, so we can survive. And in the middle is the we call this an emotional brain, let's say, the fear center, the amygdala. Most of the time, all the information we process, our brain will starts with the emotions. So that is the emotion center for us to process everything we perceive. Another study I've read shows that all the conversation we have complaint includes two parts. One part is the information itself. The other part is the emotion. So all the messages we share to others includes those two parts. And our brain is too smart. We've always processed that emotion first, then the message. And if we can thinking about our four fingers like up front, so that is what we call the thinking brain or the prefrontal cortex. So that is, the most powerful part across our whole body. I would say this is the most magical or powerful organ in the human nature, like that can beat for all the what we call the AI world. So this is the most powerful tool we have. We have this thinking brain to plan, to organize, to problem solving, use all our potentials to create, to stay regulated, solve complex programs. And that's the whole brain. And most of the time, when we process the emotion, we gradually flip the lid. So that means the emotional brain takes charge. The reason for us to plan, to organize, problem solving, to give rational answer, it just flipped. So we lose the capacity to solve or to deal with conflicts or heightened emotions, high emotions, and we're all fully charged with our feelings, our thoughts. So that's the part of how people react with either fight, flight, or freeze. And there is also a fourth form. Do you know what it is? Have you heard of it? Anyone? They call it fawn, Fawn, like a little deer, plead. Whenever there's a conflict, their first initial thought is plead with the person. Yes, you're sure, you're right. 100%. You know what? You are right. It's me. I'm wrong. Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, whenever you need, yeah, yeah, take it. So that's how people react with all the conflicts. And that fawn, most of the time, is because of their previous life experience, the lack of supporting system, um, authority, lack of control. So that's how they cope with heightened conversations or they perceive it as a challenge or threat. So by saying that, what I want to share here is people are communicating with you from different ways, and all behavior is a form of communication. And those fight, flight, or freeze or fawn, they are the coping strategies or responses to those heightened conversations. And most of the time, people will take it personally and they think like, oh, they're making a scene, make it worse. And there is a lot behind the scene that we haven't thought about. And also thinking about what we say the person-centered and trauma-informed approach. And that is the focus we'll talk about today as well. So we've understand how brain works. Let's continue with the next exercise. So I want to ask your feedback and thinking about this question, I know you've taken many trainings related to trauma, person-centered, trauma-informed. So here I want to open the door for you. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. I just want to hear some of your feedbacks. In your own word, can any volunteer tell me what is trauma? What does it mean to you? And also, what does a person-centered and trauma-informed approach mean to you? Let's start with the first question. In your own words, okay? There's no right or wrong. What is trauma?
A disturbing experience?
Yes, thank you so much. As a starting point, a disturbing experience. That's a good way. Um, what can be a disturbing experience? And is it just one experience? How about the others?
I think I would categorize trauma as, like you said, not maybe one experience. It could be one experience, but it could also be a series of experiences over time, or it can be more than one different type of trauma that happens, something that really uh, disrupts our emotional well-being and our safety.
Wow, that's a very thoughtful answer. Thank you so much for your input on this.
Thank you.
Yes. So that is a consideration. So thinking about it could be not just one issue, one event. It could be a series of events or a set of circumstances, right? And also, let's say, thinking about the timeline, one event that happened over time, over and over again, not just like one issue. And it could be a combination of different events happening over and over again across time. And it will cause, I heard some words like some influences to us. So let's thinking about the influences. What are the influences that might have? I heard the emotional harm, Anyone else? Anything else? Mm. I'm checking the chat box. A really hard experience, impact of bad experience. So that's like a very great starting point to think about. Um, and how about the person-centered and trauma-informed approach? What does this mean to you? So we heard about, it could be a set of events, series of events, or a set of circumstances that has a negative influence to someone. It could be either physically or emotionally harm or life-threatening. And for the effect for the person, it could be either mentally or physically, socially, how they communicate with others, and their emotionally or the spiritually well-being. So it has a long-term, long-lasting adverse effects. So that is the trauma. And what does the person-centered and trauma-informed approach mean to you, folks? We always hear this word, person-centered, trauma-informed. So what does this mean to you?
I think it would mean kind of validating the person's experience, regardless if we can understand it or not, because trauma affects everybody differently. So, not kind of putting a judgment on it.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great starting point. Amazing. Thank you. So remain non-judgmental. Avoid assuming like we know the person or categorizing, labeling people with different behaviors because we don't know what the person have been through. And having those trauma-informed and person-centered approach is a great way to start learning, change our mind from like what's wrong with you to what happened to you. There might be a reason for them to communicate their behavior with you in a specific way. A trauma-informed approach does not mean we're lowering our expectation or ignoring those behavior. So this is something I want to highlight. It means it means like the understanding the context and also the context behind the behavior before we're responding to it. So we don't just assume we know the person and we take those distress behavior, their coping strategy as being aggressive to us. So that's the definition we have from Substance Use and Mental Health Services Agency. So the trauma and violent definition from 2024. Here's the one I found online, and I found that's really easy to understand. So that means the result from an event, the series of events, and also a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful. Or the other side, I mentioned the life-threatening. And that has a long-lasting adverse effect on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And that is the definition of what we call a person, what is trauma. The other piece I want to mention is the other triggers that could change people's reaction. Since we are supporting the youth group, have you heard of this study that has been practiced for the past few decades? People call this ACE or adverse childhood experience. Research shows that the higher exposure to those adverse childhood experiences is associated with the increased stress responses and also the challenges with emotional regulation, the learning, and also the health later in life. And it has been so they are expanding those indicators. But the most important three types of adverse childhood experience includes abuse, neglect, and also the household dysfunction. So when we say abuse, it includes either physical abuse in their um, social determinants of health in their household, or the emotional abuse by their family members, or sexual abuse by family members. The other part is the neglect, either the physical neglect or the emotional neglect. And the other part about the household is, their family members live with mental health issues, incarcerated relatives, especially close family members. The mother treated violently, substance use, and divorce. So those are the 10 hierarchy, the 10 like the overarching questions from the adverse childhood experience. And they are also expanding more components, either across the community, across the school, but these top 10 questions are also the core. One thing for you to remind you, and the reason why I'm sharing it here, and also as you can see from the study, I put some of the papers there. The adverse childhood experience increase the risk, but they do not determine a person's future. It's just according to study, um, the higher adverse childhood experience may cause a higher rates of people respond to specific ways, and also a higher rate of chronic mental health challenge, chronic financial crises, substance use issues, domestic violence, or we call this intimate partner violence. And you know that ratio changed varies from 4 times higher to 12 times higher than people with lower adverse childhood experience. But that's just according to the study, in general, but it doesn't define the whole story. I do have many people or contacts with, um, let's say, very high adverse childhood experience ACE scores, but they're still living in a hopeful, contributing life, either as social workers or nurse, or even for me, I'm being vulnerable here. I have very high adverse childhood experience scores, but it doesn't define me. Um, so similarly, one thing to help you to remind is we may see some of the common trends here. It may increase the risk, but they do not determine how a person's future. The supportive relationships, especially for the frontline staff, we can buffer the effects of the adversity. And also remember, not all newcomer students have experienced those trauma or those adverse childhood experiences. So we don't make assumption like they all experience. Many demonstrate a very remarkable resilience and strengths. Okay, so that is adverse childhood experience. And now let's come back to those real example. You know, Thinking about the fight, flight, or freeze or fawn, like we've spent some time to talk about so far. A client says, like, you don't care about us. The system is unfair. But with all the understanding behind this, do you still think the person is just like give you a flippant comment or being aggressive? Most of the time, it means that anger, it reflects to the fear of self-control, the fear of being related to their previous life experiences, or sometimes because of the loss, the frustration, and the unmet needs in common. And most of the time, that's how they communicate their distresses. But it doesn't mean they are communicating this 24/7 all the time. So coming back to my statements, all behavior is a form of communication. And distress behavior can be how a person communicate their distresses. Another study I've learned so far, it's interesting. Some studies says the emotion, the anger, sometimes it's a secondary emotion. It's built on the other primary emotions. So it escalates to our anger thoughts, either because of those sad or fear, loss, frustration, and then The anger is the secondary emotion added to the primary one. So coming back to the behaviors has meanings. Sometimes, the distress behaviors often means, like I mentioned, the secondary emotion. It could means either the fear or threat, the confusion about the system, about their situation, or they feel shame, the loss of control, or sometimes in general, the trauma triggers their responses, either the adverse childhood experience and also the trauma in the newcomer's experience. So what I want to reframe our thought here before we move forward is thinking about the understanding piece. When we understand how they communicate, it doesn't mean we are accepting the harm, like we become, the punch bag, we just accept all the pain. It doesn't mean we are accepting that harm. It means we are interpreting the behavior from another perspective. So that interpretation comes before our intervention. We are still helping the person. We are still setting our boundaries. And we are helping the person with this more overarching, non-judgmental, objective interpretation. So we don't respond with our thoughts, our implicit bias, our feelings. Okay. So that comes to those behaviors. And one thing I really want to address, as many of us have aware of, is the trauma in the newcomer experience. It's not for all of them, but we have to be honest. Some newcomer students and families, they may have experienced some of the following situations, either because of the war or the conflict in their country or in their region. The displacement or the refugee journeys. I worked with YMCA and some frontline staff who used to work in those refugee camps in other like war zones. Stories I heard were were like different from my initial thoughts. So the journey they experienced, it embeds as like a huge acute trauma to the person. And the third part, the separation from family members. One thing I've learned from my mental health first aid training is when we support newcomers or immigrants, let's just thinking about like depending on like the various reasons for them to come to this new country. One thing in common is there must be someone or something they left in their country, in their origin. The separation from family members is painful. And we cannot just ignore it and we assume like the person will get over it. Another piece, the major cultural and the language transitions, without the supports to integrate to the new system with the language barriers, the loss of community and also the support networks, and also the experience of discrimination. Like there is an elephant in the room. People are not talking about discrimination, and people are not looking for supports because of the fear or losing trust with the organization or because of the lack of information or the fear of retaliation. They are afraid of looking for help or report those discriminations. All those barriers accumulate someone's response to one point. Like they just express their thoughts, express their challenges for one point. And that means we have to be receptive, to be person-centered and trauma-informed, to aware of those potential experiences someone may have, and also be um, non-judgmental to those responses. And that's why I have many recommendations in the next few slides. So what it means here, it means trauma. It most of the time it does not define a person. It may influence how stress and safety are experienced, and we are not assume put a person into the same category. Oh, the people live with conflict or war will communicate in this way. A plus B equals C. This is not a simple formulation. Even though our brain is hardwired with problem solving, we want to find those patterns. We want to find those, the shortcuts to solve the problem. But meantime, however, we can't just categorize and assume we know how to support people with the specific categories. Okay. So those are the theories, the philosophies behind our conversation here. In moving forward with all we learned so far, let's talk about what can we do in the framework. And if there is a way that can describe the people's early signs to their expressions and the staff approach and how we learn, what is it? And that is a part I want to introduce the Pearl arc. Okay. And before we move forward, just to give you a final recap of this trauma piece, we talk about the trauma, and trauma is not just one form. It could be either a acute trauma that something could happen to anybody at any time, or sometimes it could be a chronic trauma. One traumatic event keeps recurring, or the complex trauma someone lived with, a series of events happened to someone that cause a long-lasting effect after they turn adulthood, and also the vicarious trauma for us, for the frontline heroes, the emotional burdens we carry forward, and also the historic trauma. So that's also built on the chronic. So that means a huge traumatic event happened to one group, one community that caused a generational experiences for one community or specific group. So coming back to our understanding, if there is a framework that can, summarize everything together, what that might look like. So this is one I created by myself. Again, I'm not using this to give you like a very flippant comment. This is based on the three frameworks I learned from those three nationally recognized teaching programs. So the Pearl Arc is the overarching framework I can think of in the easiest way. It starts from the P, which is the pressure. Then E means expression, or pression, expression, alignment, alignment, redirection, then réorientation. I hope I'm close to the French pronunciation. I'm learning French for over 1,000 days, but still it's challenging sometimes. And then the L means learning. So PEARL is a whole framework that we can support the person in distress and after. So let's start from the first one, P, pressure. Starting with the P, the reason why I put it there, as we can aware of, we spent almost like 50 minutes on this topic. Before the conflict, there is stress and trauma. So we have to acknowledge that. And before we respond, we have aware that the pressure often appears before the conflict. So that's a starting point, the pressure. Some examples you may hear is, the person is not causing any defensive behavior. They're not causing like a conflict to others, but you will see there is something wrong to the person, either pacing, fidgeting, signing, like total signing, or withdrawal. On the other side, they refuse to talk to others, or the tone, the volume, the speed, how they communicate, they change. So under that pressure, we always say the person has or they presents a change in the usual behavior. So it's not themselves as usual. And also thinking about the experiences, I brought this back again for your reference. Those might be another layer of triggers to the person communicate, and they may perceive some triggers as life-threatening. It's not real, but to them, that's how they feel those are real. Okay. So that is the first part. Pressure often appears before conflict, the change in the usual behavior, pacing, signing, withdrawal. They speaks louder, faster. The tone becomes shaking, and also thinking about um, how those traumatic experiences, or no, I don't want to use the word trauma all the time, but their previous life experiences may get in the way in how they respond. And I also like the participants' response in the chat box from Samuel, acknowledging that the person you are dealing with may have faced trauma and therefore need to create a safer environment for them as you interact with them. Perfect, wonderful. And also, Catherine said, following the lead of the client, yes, and listen to their experience and also being informed and researching what they experience could be. Yeah, listen to understand, active listening, avoid assuming we know the person. Um, Sometimes the country, the cultural specific reasons behind how they respond. That's wonderful, lovely. Thank you. Okay, so that is the first part, the pressure piece. Let's move on to the next action. I call this expression. I don't want to use this as like an outburst or aggressive. Similarly to our other feelings, when you have thoughts, when you have ideas, we may communicate with different to others with different ways. So that's the part I want to use E. When those stress and trauma becomes visible. So that means those early uneasiness or those early signs, the change in typical behavior, those early unmet needs is not being solved or supported. So those thoughts are escalated. The people may feel either misunderstood or challenged or threatened. So again, that we're thinking from the person in distress, from their perspective, from their lens. So they felt they're being challenged, threatened, or misunderstood. So that's the part that they have to communicate with you from another level of communication. So that's the expression. So when the stress and trauma becomes visible, so the person is protecting themselves from a real or perceived as a challenge or threat. Sometimes, and most of the time, you'll see the person starts with refusal. When we offer an alternative to the person, the person in distress will simply just say no, refuse. Even though we give them options, we give them supports. They're like, no, I just want the one I want, the only one I need. Or sometimes yelling, shouting, increasing their volume to yell, to shout, or challenging behaviors. For example, asking you those challenging questions. Like, who do you think you are? Tell me what to do. Like, just hire more people, keep things moving. Or you hear the comment says, like, send me back, send me back. Or use those intimidations, um, either to people around them or either to the staff member, or sometimes they use intimidation to themselves, self-harm. Give me that support, give me that, those permit, or give me that access, or I will do something. Or step forward aggressively, or use the words, giving those intimidation. And all those coming back to our previous conversation, thinking about those expressions, they're often self-protection coping strategies. It's not a personal attack. Some of their responses might be a coping strategy that helped them in the past, but they're using the same coping strategy that in hopes that they can solve it this time, um, which is not helpful at this moment. And similarly, it's not just like people communicating all the time with this behavior. It could be just like the first time they feel like, all emotionally charged. They don't know what to do. And their emotional brain is fully takes charge from those early P pressure session. They gradually flip the lid to the expression. They are losing, the thinking brain is losing control. And that's the part that they just started communicating with their emotions, with their thoughts, their feelings. And coming back to those stress and trauma expressed for newcomers, according to study, um, some of the common behaviors for newcomers to express their stress and trauma includes either the withdrawal or keeping silent. So just avoid communicating with others. Their heightened vigilance, perceive everything as a threat, as a challenge. And it's even though it's a safe environment for others, but to them it's still there is danger. They're hyper vigilant, perceive even like a small trigger as a defensive behavior. And sometimes, the strong emotion to perceive the unfairness, if they were treated with different standards or they thought they were treated unfairly, their emotions will suddenly escalate, like they just suddenly flip the lid to the high peaks because of their previous life experience. If they felt they were treated unfairly. Difficult concentrating, that's another piece. There's another topic, but I don't want to mention that too much. It could be like another full day training, which is the TBI, the traumatic brain injury. So that could be either from the physical injury to emotional injury, psychological injury that cause a permanent effect to someone's brain. But with those traumatic experiences, the person may have difficulty concentrating and also the avoidance of authority because of their previous life experience. The power distance was high and people didn't receive sufficient support. And that's the part they avoid of those authority. But again, there's not like one fits for all. Those are some studies and researches that I found, and also based on my own experience, that people may communicate with their stresses in this way. So that's the expression. Okay. Then we move forward to the next part. So now we're aware of the early signs, the pressure, the expression. The next one is for the staff. Okay. Alignment. How staff response shape their interaction. So now we have that awareness, we have that capacity. And honestly, from your response, I can see that some of us, or maybe most of us, or all of us, are already on the track. Um, but this time we just have a framework to tell you like you are already doing this the correct thing. So here, let's come back to the alignment. How staff response shape that interaction. The staff response can calm or escalate those emotions. As I mentioned earlier, people communicate in different ways. And when we have those interactions with person in distress, the communication starts from us as the staff member. It's not like one conversation. We aware of the person in distress. We know their triggers. We know their response pattern. That's just one part. The other part is for the staff. The conversation is always like interactive. We aware of the person in distress, and now is the time for us. How we respond, how we can calm the person, or maybe we'll escalate that emotion, that conflict, and put ourselves into that power struggle, or we call this like a no end, like a circulation. So some of the hierarchy recommendations, as you can see here, I will also um, dive deeper for each of those strategies. So according to study, the first one is remain non-judgmental. It's easy to say, but it's very hard to do. I hear you. We all have our biases. We all have our judgments. And sometimes those implicit, preconceived ideas may get in the way of how we see the conversation. We may have those comments like, oh, people like them may think they will do something, or I know the person will communicate in this way the first time I saw them, or a specific gender or specific skin color or their nationality, um, their ethnicity, the area they're living with. their income status, their education background. We always use those different indicators to judge a person. But coming back to the first conversation, if we remain non-judgmental and think the person's unique path, we're supporting the person from a person-centered approach. And that's the second part. We listen with empathy, which is different from sympathy. We do have another exercise to discuss, like what is the difference between empathy and sympathy? But if we use our active listening, listen with empathy, ask open-ended questions to understand, to learn their experience, do more researching, like Catherine mentioned, that would be a great way to frame how we respond. And don't assume or tell. We assume we know the person. We know what's the best, or give those recommendations like you should do this, you should do that, rather than listening to the person and paraphrase what you heard. So that is a great approach to active listening. And that is a very helpful tool for me in all my conversations. I've been getting involved in many um, difficult conversations, either with mental health challenge or people with thoughts of suicide or people with high emotions. I learned that paraphrase what I heard back to the person is a really helpful tool to make sure they are being heard. And that helps them to de-escalate to the situation. And the last part is to objectively assess the level of risks. That's a part people always feel like, I don't want it to make it worse. I don't want it to become a trigger to the person, or when someone discloses some of their thoughts, their intents. You feel like either you may make yourself become like another trigger to the person to do some attempts, or people will use their intimidation to you to get the result they want. But we have to objectively assess the level of risks, either, sorry, to consider the likelihood of that behavior. Like, what is the possibility of the person will do the action, and also the severity of harm. That is another matrix we are using. When we are thinking about risk, two essential indicators we're considering is either the likelihood of the behavior and also the severity of the harm. And the other part, to thinking about the intimidation, um, there is a strategy to objectively analyze when intimidation escalates to a risk behavior. Well, in short, like all many eh, I'm trying to explain in an easier way. Many safety team or the police team are using the framework. So it's like you're drawing a triangle with three indicators to assess a intimidation to a real risk behavior. The first one is what we called the means, the method. Either like use a knife or use a gun or use other ways. So that's the means. The second one is the proximity, which means how close the person is with the intent. Like, are they like 1 feet away or 10 feet away from you? And then the third one is the intent. Will the person really use or having like a really strong thought or idea of using the means that close to you to cause that harm? So if any of those triangles is missing, let's say the person is very far from you and says, "Oh, I'm going to do something," um, we're losing that means. So it's a threat. It's not an immediate risk. Similarly, if the person is very close to you and they'll use like, "Oh, I'm going to like do something," or like either use a knife to stab you, but there's no equipment at all. Again, so that is the intimidation. Or the other part, even though we have those means, we have the proximity, you are supporting the person, but they're not giving you any escalated responses to causing harm. So we're losing that capacity. I'm sorry, that intent. So again, those just intimidation. Objectively assess the level of risk will better help us to objectively analyze the whole situation from an overarching way. So that is the A action. So now we go through the PEA. Now we're going to that R response. So thinking about the response, the redirection, that's the part we're not becoming a punchback. We're setting our boundaries. And also the redirection means to shifting that incorrection toward safety. For the training today, as Olivia mentioned this morning, we're talking about de-escalation. But this is different from what we call perfect customer service. This is not that training. Our goal in all our conversations is to de-escalate, which means we want to bring their thinking brain back so they can make a more objective decision in their life. And for staff here, it doesn't mean we are losing our limits or we are becoming the helper to solve all their daily life challenges. Our goal here is to help the person to reach to tension reduction. So bring their thinking brain back. And that by doing this, we align with our approach, aware of their pressure, their expression, alignment now to the redirection, shifting the interaction towards safety. So what can we do? First thing first, small communication shifts. Those can change the outcome, especially when the person is in distress. Their thinking brain is losing control. They are all emotionally charged with emotions, flipping the lid. Do you think we can give the person a very rational, detailed response and the person can just simply follow? Most of the time, no. So what we can guide a person is, first thing first, we use short, clear, and simple phrases that the person can follow. And offer the reasonable choices with positive outcomes. What does it mean? When the person is hypervigilant, when the person is hyperreactive to perceive everything as a threat or challenge, if you use those negative or punitive consequences, the person may perceive you as a threat implicitly. For example, let me give you two easier ways. If your client is screaming or yelling, if you say, okay, all right, I hear you. If you don't stop yelling, I will call the security. Or, hey, if you can lower your voice, then I can better write down your concern and better support you. Which approach do you think might help better to the staff or to the client? And according to study, if we can offer the reasonable choice with a positive outcome, it will change how person reacts to you. They will not perceive you as a threat. They will not perceive you as a predator. They will perceive you as someone you want to help. Convey our respect is the third one, especially for the kids or the family members who are already lack of supports. They may communicate with you in some escalated behavior, or you feel like, oh my God, that's too much. Like I'm not my job to help people in distress. But or sometimes one client may repeat the similar behavior quite a few times, or their behavior becomes agitated or always refuse. And that's a part for us. We convey our respect. Remain non-judgmental, give our respect per idea, and using our caring tone to the person. Um, Consider the verbal, nonverbal, paraverbal communication. That's another piece. We will talk about that in the short break after. and call for help if there is an immediate harm. We're not putting ourselves in danger. Our safety is a top priority. If you feel like there is an immediate harm, the person is causing harm to themselves, to others, that's a part we will always call for help. But coming back to that convey respect, one thing to add on is thinking about our own triggers, our own behaviors,
Yeah,
and our own
I think, but I'm not sure.
thinking about our own responses that might get in the way of how we respond. And feel free to put your thoughts, your ideas, your reflections in the chat box. I will definitely keep an eye out. So that is a redirection piece. We'll dive deeper after the break later. But the last part is the learning part. After every single conversation, after every single intervention, how can we rebuild that trust? Either the person with you or with the SWIS whole team or with other school settlement workers, or how can we rebuild that dignity to the person so we don't put themselves in a more what we call condoning way and understanding the whole background. So that's the part I learned from those restorative justice and also from the rights-based services by World Health Organization. After every single conversation we support the clients, it's not the end. Repair is also part of the safety. It's not what we call an extra kindness. It means we support the person in the present, even though they're communicating with us, as I mentioned, with the different communication ways, the change in their typical behavior, their expressing their thoughts. And the second part is we don't rush until they're ready to talk about that incident. As a assist trainer with supporting people with thoughts of suicide, and as a mental health first aid trainer to support people with mental health challenges, one thing I've learned here is no matter how big or how small the issue is to the person, eventually the person who get involved will talk about it. But we don't rush them until they're ready to talk. So be an active listener, stay with the person until they're ready to talk and face about that incident. And the third part of the learning is to understand the triggers. We talk about the different triggers, the cultural perspective, their previous life experience, the adverse childhood experience. What are the environmental triggers or patterns that we didn't aware of? So those might be something we can learn for future intervention. Keep us in mind, and we can create a toolbox, or we can create those um, best practices that works best for Swiss team, and then uncover what happened and when. Most of the time, it happens way earlier than we have thought. Um, and the identify piece is to have that conversation with the person. Again, when we have that conversation opportunity, understand what helped to the people, to the staff, to the clients, to the family member, and what didn't help. So we know the skills we help the person individually and plan to prevent escalation from happening again. So that is a part that's coming back to that thinking brain. Their thinking brain finally comes back. And that's the part that they can rationally thinking about the whole behavior, their whole conversation. So that's the part that we can set that ground baseline with the person in distress. So the person is not preventing escalation from happening again. So that's the learning piece. So overall, that is a whole pearl arc. So let's do another revamp. Excuse me. So it's not always in linear. In a perfect world, the person may communicate with you like in linear, but sometimes it will just escalate to that expression. But in our pearl arc, the pressure, understand those hidden stress, the uncertainty, the fear, the expression. So that means the unmet needs is being threatened, challenged, misunderstood. So that's the emotional outburst, the escalating behavior. Then that comes to our self as alignment. To build that connection, to show the empathy with the person and redirect. Set limits, offer choices, thinking about positive behaviors. And finally, we bring their thinking brain back. You remember, that's our goal. Our goal is to de-escalate. Bring their thinking brain back so they can make a rational decision for themselves. And that's a part for us to learn, to reflect on the conversation. What works well, what is not? What are the potential triggers? What is something we haven't aware of? So to reflect and understand and plan for the future so the person is not repeating the similar behavior from happening again. And that is the first part of our study. We understand how brain works. We learn about person-centered and trauma-informed care. We go over the whole Pearl arcs, understanding the unique traumatic experiences or life experiences for newcomers, refugees, and how we implement the Pearl arc. So now I'm checking the time. It's 10:20. Let's take a 10 minutes break and we'll come back at 10:30 to continue our study to implement all those Pearl arc in real conversations. Time's up. Welcome back, folks. I hope you like the little dog here doing the dog yoga. All right. Raise your hand if you are back, please. Or give me a thumb up. Just want to make sure like you are back before we proceed. Wow, love those thumb ups. Great. It feels like Tone, you're doing a great work. Let's keep moving. Thank you, thank you. What a great way to start the day. Actually, yesterday was my birthday, and it was a challenging day because of the weather and have to work. But I'm really looking forward to the training today. So thank you. I hope we learn. Thanks. I hope we learn a lot from the part one session because I don't want to waste your time attending the training with me, but didn't receive anything like important or tangible that can be transferred into your daily work. So thank you. And thanks so much for all those wishes. I really sincerely appreciate that. Yeah, my year 8 in Halifax alone, far away from my family. It's challenging, but it's I can see my engagement with the community. Yeah. Uh, so welcome back, everyone. Let's continue with the next part for part two. So how we can implement to with those skills we've learned so far to our daily life and also to our daily work. So before we proceed, the first thing I want to mention is thinking about the core logic of the nonviolent de-escalation. When we say de-escalation, it doesn't mean we are, losing our boundaries, like our limitations. We just take all those comments, behaviors, ourselves. Remember, when we say empathy and structure, they must be coexist. We provide our limitations, we provide our help to the person, but also with our active listening skills, show our empathy with the person. So that includes the three high-level hierarchy words or the philosophy. The first one is care, sincere care. Show our respect to the person from our person-centered approach. Show the dignity to the person without putting our personal implicit bias with the person. And that's a sincere care. The second one is the clarity. Ask. Don't assume or tell. If there is a one piece you're not sure, we don't assume we know the person and use our active listening, remain non-judgmental. The reason why I put non-judgmental here a few times was because I also learned this from my mental health first aid training. When I was in Vancouver, one of the other participant who registered for the facilitator training was from the indigenous community. So he's Métis, Inuit, and in his reserve, his chief always say this sentence all the time. And in English, it means check your bias at the door. It's not, remain non-judgmental, remain like check our aware of our implicit bias is not one skill set we have and then done. we have to practice on a daily basis. So remain non-judgmental and also set the boundaries. The limitation with positive outcomes. But we're not thinking about negative or punitive. And we do have recommendations to show you later today. So the three psychological philosophy: care, clarity, and boundaries. Okay, so with that in mind, let's continue. The principles of trauma-informed care. I I really love the new formation because the old one missed something really important, which is the peer support. And nowadays, the trauma-informed approach and programs, as identified by Substance Use and Mental Health Services Association, updated their understanding of trauma-informed care principle. And by the way, I'm going to take a trauma-informed care trainer program in a few weeks. Then I'm certified to offer trauma-informed care training for to extend my understanding to support people from a person-centered, trauma-informed way. But from an overarching approach, safety either creates a physical, psychological, and emotional safety environment for the person. Trustworthiness and transparency. So that's another high level principle for trauma informed care, building that trust even during the conflict or before and after. Remain our transparency with the person. We don't give the wrong promises. Sometimes when we get involved into those conversations, especially when those conversations with high emotions, we want to give them some wrong promises. Like, you know what? Yes, I got you covered 100%. Absolutely. Yeah, I will solve that problem. We think we will de-escalate, give them the commitment so they can bring their thinking brain back. But honestly, according to study, if we give them the wrong promises or promise the things we cannot fulfill, we just give them a very flippant comment, a wrong expectation. And when they come back in the future, their their emotions will be, well, increased to another level. And collaboration and mutuality is another principle. Even with like a very small matter object, collaborate with the person and create that mutuality. One training I attended with Dr. Ershad Manji, she is a renowned professor in New York University, and she created a course called The Moral Courage. The Moral Courage. Um, and Central Library invited her to Halifax 2 years ago, I think. It's like a series of speaker session. And she mentioned about in that moral courage part, de-escalation, especially when people with different ideas, conflicts. One high recommendation she mentioned is rather than look for common grounds, let's create common grounds. Even like a small work, small project that you can invite a person to work together, especially with people with different conflicts, different ideas. It's a great way to support the person. And also thinking about the under the trauma-informed care principle, thinking about the cultural, historical, and gender issues. We don't make the assumption. Keep an active listening lens to the cultural background, the historic background, and also the gender identity issues. Not just gender issues, gender identity. Then the last piece is to empower the person. Most of the time, when the person communicates with high emotions, they either feel misunderstood or challenged or threatened, so they feel they lose the self-control or the responsibility or authority to themselves. So how to empower the person, give them the authority back to them, hear their voice, offer choices. That is another key principle from a trauma-informed care approach. And last but not least, the peer support. Um, Nowadays, many research and studies have shown the importance of peer support rather than relying on the authorities, organizations, emergency response teams. Having peer support is a really tangible and helpful way to support people with mental health challenges and with different thoughts by through peer support. People have been there and they share their experiences. Even though recovery means different to others, they will share their path just to give them that hope. What they are experiencing right now is just for now, and they're not alone. There are supports that are on the way that are around them, and people are in recovery. So that is the whole principle a quick glance for trauma-informed care. So with that in mind, especially thinking about the trauma-informed approach, let's proceed to the next part, thinking about our communication. According to a study by Dr. Morabian, actually it's back to 1970s. It's a closed study, but nowadays people are always using this ratio. Across all our communications, remember the emotional brain, the thinking brain, and every information we share includes two parts, the message itself and also the emotion. So with that framework, Morabian explored the ratio for how people communicate. This is not accurate, but just for your reference. Most of the time, it's not just the word we choose, but how we say the word. 7% of our communication falls to words, the word we choose. Then 38 falls under the paraverbal, which means the tone, the volume, the speed, how you say the word. So that it's around 38. And more than a half of our conversation falls under the nonverbal communication. So either the gestures, the facial expression, the eye contact, the use of touch, then also the personal space, our posture. It's all part of our conversation, and it's also part of our communications, either with our sharing our thoughts, our ideas, or our emotions simultaneously. Again, this is not accurate nowadays because it's like a closed control experiment. But keep that ratio in mind. It's not just how we choose a word and say the word, but also our whole body to transmit the information. And that comes to the three pieces of communication. We say communications have three channels. The first one is the words we use to send the message. Either it could be neutral, or we use positive words, or we may use some patronizing or negative comments. So that's the part we'll start with, how we choose a word and thinking about alternative responses to create that respectful environment from beginning. Then paraverbal, the way words are said, such as the tone, the volume, the speed, to show your sincere care and show your respect to the person. And last but not least, the nonverbal, body language, gestures, facial expression, eye contact, personal space, posture, use of touch. So let's dive deeper on each of the communication. And as I mentioned, remember in high emotion conversations, the communication becomes a continuum. It could be lessened and it can also be increased through those practical skills. First thing first, small actions matter. All behavior is a form of communication, and distress behavior can be how a person communicates their distress. So basically, what we want to share here is people are not just sharing their thoughts or flippant comment to you. Most of the time, we're just a person right there to provide help. And in those high emotion conversations, thinking about the hand model, they gradually flip the lid, the thinking brain losing control. So in high emotions, the logic decreases, the emotion increases, fully charged with thoughts, emotions, and the perception becomes sensitive. Usually our brain process threats or challenge. It's not very accurate, but in average, probably 5 times per second. But when the person is in hyper-vigilant, hypersensitive phase, they perceive everything as a threat. So it could be 5 to 10 times per second. So that means they're hyper-vigilant, and all the small behaviors we provide will make a huge difference. So coming back to our pressure arc. Identify the behaviors at the pressure arc, starting with the P. I want to bring this into three different communication tools, the three different channels. Can I have any volunteers to share how does a person communicate their pressure using the different forms of communication? Words, the paraverbal and nonverbal. So let's start from verbal. How does a person show their pressure using the words? What might they say? Or think about yourself. If you are in that pressure arc, what might you say if you are in stress?
Be more negative, critical, or even blaming someone.
Yes. Wow,
Uh,
thank you so much. Yeah, that's a great consideration. Being negative, critical
raise,
to others. Yes.
raise our voices.
Oh, that's a good approach. Raise your voice. Is it falls under verbal or paraverbal? Oh, I saw the comments in the chat. Oh, leave me alone. Yes, like the avoidance. Withdrawal, avoidance is one piece of communication. Or sometimes they may communicate in a more like direct way. Like I'm fine, or like truly I'm fine. Like leave me alone. Or sometimes they say I'm I'm overwhelmed. I'm anxious. I'm not, I don't feel well. Um, or sometimes people will just comment with those pessimistic way, with this the passive comments. Thinking about something like that bad things are going to happen, just think passively, connects with their previous life experience. But how about the paraverbal? I heard one comment says they will increase their volume, speaks louder, and they may not aware of it. How about their tone and their speed? Mm, yes. The tone, the speed, the volume. Most of the time, people in distress will increase their volume, raise their voice, and speaks faster. Like, how does a person show pressure using the different forms of communication? Like, they feel like being rushed, and that's how they react. When the adrenaline, we call this the emotional brain, when it activates, we flip the lid, it actually produces two hormones, the adrenaline or the cortisol. So it makes our heart beats faster. So more oxygen is running through our brain and also across our body. So we're ready, for fight to the monsters or flight to run away. So our brain is fully charged with more oxygens. So that's the part people will increase their volume and speaks faster. So that's the very common response there. Sometimes a strong, aggressive tone, and maybe their thoughts will race, so they don't finish the sentences. Yes, and think faster than they can speak. That's a good input. Thank you. And sometimes the person remains silent doesn't mean they don't want to talk. It just means there are lots of thoughts in their mind and looking for a way to communicate with you. So that is a paraverbal. Especially, nowadays we don't have those monsters, those animals in the wilderness. The daily challenges, either, the emails, the conversation with others, um, or in our workplaces, their immigrant journey, those are all perceived as threats. And coming back to the nonverbal, yes, I saw some body language, gestures, and facial expressions. Those are great responses to consider. So let's come back, switch our lens to the other side. So now we're aware people may communicate with you. Again, I want to frame this. They are communicating with you through defensive behavior. And distress behavior can be how they communicate their distresses. So what can you say or ask to support, to communicate your support? Let's start from the words. What can we say or ask? Remember, ask to communicate your support. Any strategies, any best practices that helped you in the past?
Just to, so you can just let them know that you're there with them, instead of,
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. Address that. Tell them I'm here. I'm here with you. Show our sincere care to the person. Offer help. Ask if I can help. Yeah. And thank you, Mira, starts with that I statement. I can see you are overwhelmed. How can I help? Rather than saying, you look overwhelmed. So, that conversation, that comment will put you implicitly as you're confronting with the person. So when we say I, we switch that lens to us. Yeah, I've noticed that you are overwhelmed. I can see that you're overwhelmed or anxious. How can I help? Great. And be calm. Eye contact. Yes, so those are also part of our paraverbal and nonverbal communication. So now let's just focus on the words. Yes, let them know that they are not alone. Great. Give reassurance, acknowledge their feelings. They are not alone. Every problem or situation can be resolved. Um, oh, another piece. Ask open questions. Hey, I would like to understand better what you are feeling. Let's try to slow down a bit so we can discuss what you are going through. Wonderful. Paraphrase their demand, right? From what I heard, are you looking for the school program, the supports? So paraphrase the request from the person and show them the positive part of the story. That's great. Yeah, when we give feedbacks, I would just attended another training for giving feedbacks and offer help. Show them the positive part of the story. And if you want to give a critical feedback, usually it's after 3 to 4 positive parts. So to approve, give them those recognition, then you can give one critical feedback. So that is a ratio. We don't just tell them, oh, this is something you're doing wrong. We start with the positive part of the story. Great. So some studies we have, according to research, some of the communications have been verified by our participants. First, acknowledge their feelings, and also from ourselves. I've noticed, I hear, I listen, I understand what you said, and ask open questions just to expand on how they feel, on feelings, and offer to help. Keep the sentence short, simple, and clear. Remember, they're flipping the lid. We can't give them a detailed, rational answer. So keep our sentence short, simple, clear. And the last piece is to show respect and phrase the words positively. We don't use those negative or punitive consequences, and thinking about those hostile or sarcastic comments. The most important thing here under the verbal communication is in any situations, we are not humiliating people. Humiliation is the most hurtful piece that will significantly increase their emotional level and it will cause a persistent long-term effect back to the person. So under any given situations, we are not humiliating people. So those are the verbal communications in the alignment. See, we aware, we align. So the last part, how would you adjust your tone, your volume, and your speed when you speak to show your support? For example, if your client, if your students is screaming, yelling at you, what can we do? Yes. Speak calmly, calm, quiet. That's right. That's a wonderful starting point. According to study, if you want a person to lower their volume, honestly, um, do you think we should increase our volume to match their level? Do you need to speak louder to get over to speak over them? Great. Yeah, I saw some notes there. Wonderful. There is a term called mirror neuron from the psychological world, mirror neuron, which means our brain, remember the emotional brain process emotion first. When they flip the lid, the emotional brain takes charge. And the emotional brain did something very interesting. They will mirror to what they see. It's part of our learning strategy, you know. We imitate, we learn from others, you know, we learn the characters, we learn the tone, the volume, the speed, we learn the coping strategies from others. But sometimes with these heightened conversations, our brain will more inclined to mirror to what we see. So when the staff mirror to the clients, you know, we yell back, then we put ourselves into a no end conversation. And if we can remain calm, take a pause, remain calm, respectful, the person in distress, even though they flip the lid, they will mirror to us. So we are creating that turning point from ourselves. So that is mirror neuron. Yes, remain calm, remain non-judgmental, using a caring tone, and also use the volume, the speed that a person can follow. So recommendations here, definitely use the caring and supportive tone. Keep the volume appropriate and deliver the message at the speed the person can process. So that is the paraverbal. It's not how we choose a word, but how we say the word. Now, let's move our focus to nonverbal. Over 50% of our conversation falls under the nonverbal communication. So in a few seconds, I will ask Olivia to put you into groups of fours. I'm not sure if you can see the group's name, but if you're group one, or we can type, or I can just like join each breakout room session. So in a few seconds, I will put you into groups of fours. In your group, just thinking about the strategies that helped you or didn't help you around the topic you were given. So for the first group, we have, you know, the gestures, facial expression, and eye contact. What are some strategies that helped you to de-escalate and what didn't help? The second part for the other group is thinking about the personal space. What is a personal space? What is, let's say, the intimate space, personal bubble, or um, the conversation, the social space? What strategies helped you and what is not? For the third group, I want you to thinking about the posture when you support clients. Let's say if a client is taller than you or shorter than you, or a client is sitting where you are standing, or you are standing, or you are sitting, the client is standing, or let's say what are your best practices to support a client using wheelchair, using accessibility? What strategies helped you and what is not? And last but not least, you know, use of touch. It's one of our nonverbal communication, you know, to show our care to the person. But what strategies helped you under the use of touch? What helped? What didn't? Again, we will assign 6 minutes or 8 minutes for this exercise. And for each breakout, we will need one note taker just to jot down some notes and then share with one spokesperson. Okay? So each group, once we come back, we will identify one spokesperson to share the strategies around the topic assigned to you. What helped? What is not? And we will have a quick debrief together. Welcome back, everyone. It feels like we have lots of conversations, and I'm pretty sure we are learning from each other quite a lot. You know, this is the perfect time for adult learners to learn from each other because we are having our expertise, our knowledge, and where we're building on is to put our um, what we have learned so far, like either like by life or with life or our previous life experience or living experiences to right now. Okay, lovely. So we have one note taker to share the notes here. So let's start from the first group. So gestures, facial expression, eye contact. Can I have the spokesperson to share what you discussed? What helps you and what is not in your group?
Hi, so I think I will be the spokespersons as I was taking the notes and listening to everyone.
Uh-huh.
So we discussed the gestures and facial expressions, eye contact can be very dependent on the culture, so culture is diverse. So sometimes we also had a person discuss that they are tall and that sometimes they feel maybe aware that person who is maybe a bit smaller than them, that it might make them uncomfortable in some
Mm.
sort of way. So maybe it's a good idea to keep yourself and the other person same level, whether it be a height level or whatever. Then keeping eye contact, but also trying to mirror and to match the intensity of the other person. Uh,
Yes.
well, because we don't want to be, I don't know, staring right into their soul. Uh,
Yeah.
and of course, in the conversation, also another person, I believe it Ben, said, nodding and giving verbal cues like yes, oh, I see, I understand, to throughout the conversation to show them that you have their full attention and you focus on them at the very same moment. Um,
Uh-huh.
Also, several of the Swiss mentioned the hands, uh,
Mhm.
showing open palms to show to indicate your honest intentions, and keeping hands visible in general, especially when talking to children, to show them that you're not a threat. For example, to keep I have actually children here nearby me, so keeping the hands somewhere on the table so people can see them,
Yes.
and yes, staying calm even if the client is in distress, not showing anger or fright.
Mm.
Um, Fidgeting can or be aware of your fidgeting. Uh, Also, maybe in a stressful situation, or if you are a person who is just naturally fidgets, to be aware of it, because maybe sometimes it can be read as for others, to other people, as that you are uncomfortable or not really interested in what are they saying. So
Mm.
also, once again, as a lot of the Swiss mentioned, trying to mirror their gestures, their facial expressions, and their eye contact. Another thing with arms is to try, not try, but be aware not to cross your arms, which can indicate kind of the being closed of the situation, being closed of the person, and being closed of everything that they say to you. And also allowing the person to lead the conversation, and also choose the if you even invite them into the space, into the settings for the conversation, allowing them to choose where they want to sit. Uh,
Wow, that's
yes,
right.
and keeping
Thank
the
you so
respectful distance. Thank you.
Yeah, wow, what a very thoughtful response. Thank you, Cody. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate that. That's a wonderful teamwork, to talk about those gestures, facial expressions, and eye contact. And apologies for the interpreter found it hard to hear the speakers because of the noisy background. We have some high level takeaways in the next slides, so we will cover all the piece of work. No worries, Cody. That's fine. I appreciate your detailed response. Great. So with that in mind, let's move on to the next part. Thinking about the personal space. Let's hear from the second group. Hear from the spokesperson. Personal space.
When we work with our clients, we always make sure they feel comfortable and respected. We
Mm.
careful know to invade their personal space, which
Hmm.
helps build trust and a positive relationship. We pay attention to their body language. For example, if a client steps back or cross their arms or avoid eye contact, we give them more space and adjust our position. We
Hmm.
also keep a friendly and a professional distance during conversation, make sure they
Mm.
feel safe and relaxed.
Yes.
So by respecting personal space, we discuss like we create a welcome environment where
Hmm.
clients feel heard, understood, and valued. This
Mm.
allows them to communicate openly and comfortably, which improves our collaboration and results.
Yeah. Wow. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's definitely something we will keep in mind, like with all the skills we learned so far to support, create like a safe environment for others and also consider the personal space so they feel respected and considering the cultural backgrounds. Great. Thank you. Let's move on to the third one. You see, posture. Any spokesperson for posture?
I can speak for the posture group.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so we talked about like having open posture, so not crossing your arms, that sort of
Hmm.
thing. Like we talked about coming down to their level. So if they're either in a wheelchair or if they're, sitting down or shorter, that sort of thing, and just making sure that we're not like looking down on the kids, but actually coming to their level.
Mm.
Um, we talked also about if there are kids who maybe are already quite escalated, or you feel that maybe there is, um, the tensions are rising between two children, like kind of moving not in between, but towards that group just to make your presence known and, yeah, making sure they can feel you there. And then, yeah, we talked about like eye contact, if that feels appropriate. I know in some different cultures that can be like intimidating or not appropriate. So just, reading the group that you're in and,
Yes.
yeah, doing making eye contact if that just to make sure they know you are talking to them. We also chatted about the fact that sometimes we use interpreters in our work, and
Uh-huh.
so if you have an interpreter with you, still making sure that you're looking and directing your posture towards the person that you're actually trying to communicate with, and not just looking at the interpreter.
That's a
Um,
good point. Yes.
yeah, and so yeah, I think those are some of the key things that we chatted about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm thinking about that, especially supporting kids with the interpreters. Yeah, I used to be an interpreter a few years ago. So we were told we were just providing language services to translate, but we're not having direct conversation to one of either, yes, to either sides. Great response. Thank you. And the last but not least, use of touch.
I believe that will be me.
Yeah.
So I think when we were talking about use of touch, um, I believe it goes kind of hand in hand or overlaps a bit with personal space. And also from a cultural lens, we have to consider the spatial bubbles of certain
Mhm.
cultures sometimes because they can be different. I
Yes.
think for the best example would be, and somewhere in Europe they may do the kissing, and that's kind of
Hmm.
not the same as maybe here in Canada. So just always keeping that in mind. So in terms of when a child might be, in crisis, um, some of the group said that they have, put a hand on their shoulder. It kind of grounds them. It conveys support. It can show you care. And it's showing compassion as well. On the other hand, I think it can in reflecting on personal bubbles and spaces, some children, and I think the level of your connection with the child. If you just met them, it might be differently received than if you've had a long developed relationship with the child that, some children are more comfortable with hugs, some are not, some may pull away. So also paying attention to their nonverbal communication, their body language as well, that just
Yeah.
to keep that in mind.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Vanessa. Especially for using the touch. Like it really depends on the rapport we have with the person. And sometimes, if we don't have that rapport with the person, the use of touch may perceive as inappropriate. They may perceive those touch as aggressive behaviors. So it really depends on the comfort level. Great, great teamwork. Thank you, everyone, for your sharing. I do have some high-level recommendations for you. Again, those are based on studies, but what works for you means the most. So first thing first, the facial gesture, facial expression, eye contact. Use an appropriate eye contact. Usually, according to study, it's between 3.3 seconds. And then we can look at somewhere else and move back. And also reflects to their personal comfort level. Some cultures may, or some person may avoid eye contacting. We can mirror, and we can adjust. The second one is thinking about the facial expression. We may show our anxiety, our fear, our worry, or our frustration just from our facial expression. Just be mindful of the way your gesture with your hands. And also, I heard like when you sit on the table, make sure your hands are obvious to others. And also, open your palm means like you're accepting new ideas, being welcoming. So thinking about the gestures, not close, like being armed, or about your facial expression, like, huh? Giving those, even though you didn't say a word, your body communicates. And thinking about the personal space, we always maintain a respectful distance. So usually the social distance is around 3 meters, and personal distance or personal space is around 1.2 meters. And the intimate space is between zero point 0.5 meters. So that's in average. We always maintain a respectful distance and only move close if we want to convey our concerns and empathy, or there is a clear need to to approach to the person. But when the person is really stressed, we want to make sure seek for permission and explain what you need to do and why before you approach to the person, and always ask for permission. We don't just implicitly come closer, especially when they are hyper vigilant. They may perceive you as a threat and use aggressive behavior. And also observe their nonverbal cues. What are they communicating with their body language? And consider their previous life experiences and cultural background. So that's a personal space. And then the next one is the posture. Use our open posture. And when you move toward to someone, especially when you move close to someone, we want to pivot to the side to approach rather than approaching to the person face to face. So in their hypervigilant phase, they will perceive you as a predator. In their eyesight, there is no clear evacuation plan, and we don't want to stand next to the exit because we're blocking them to leave the room. So that will also maximize safety, minimize harm. And if the person comes close to you, similarly, we can pivot to the side. So we are standing next to the person or sit next to the person at an angle. So we are not putting ourselves implicitly as a uh, as a predator to the person. And also consider how you alter your posture. If the person is using wheelchair, I heard some approaches is to, find a chair, sit next to them, but we don't want it to lean forward like we're talking to a kid, like bend over, talk to them. Especially for people using wheelchair for a long time, they don't want to be treated like we are condoning them. So be careful when we support people using wheelchair. And the best way is to simply ask, "Hey, do you mind me grab a chair and sit next to you, or is it okay for me to talk to you like this?" Ask rather than assume. The last part is the use of touch. It's a very sensitive approach. If appropriate, we can show our support through touch. The handshake, placing the hand on their shoulder, on their hand, like pat their back, like they're there, we're here to support you. But be careful, sometimes the touch sends different messages. It really depends on the context and the person, and also their previous life experience and the rapport you have with the person. Sometimes, honestly, it can increase the distress when treated unchallenged. I do hear some responses that my friends who used to be a social worker, and she used the touch to support another female same gender student, but on the second day she received the sexual harassment report. And it took her years to get over that. Even though she wants to show her support, but when the person is in distress, they may perceive everything as a threat and challenge. Just be careful. Okay. So in summary, so when we're talking about the verbal, paraverbal, nonverbal, use clear, concise, simple words, acknowledge their feelings, and ask open-ended questions. Use our caring, supportive tone, keep the volume appropriate and the speed they can follow, and thinking about the gesture, facial expressions, eye contact, personal space, posture, use of touch. So that is the macro skill summary that will help you from the beginning. And now let's move on to the expression arc. Here, I want to share some behaviors when the person is communicating their distresses. Some challenging behaviors are presented here. First thing first, ask challenging question. It's quite normal when person are in that expression arc. Because of the limited cognitive functioning, they are fully charged with emotions and thoughts. They will ask you some questions to put you into a power struggle. It changed from the information seeking to the challenging questions. They may ask for some waiting time and then gradually switch to like, who do you think you are? Or can you just hire more people, keep things moving? Or sometimes the comments may sound like like being offending. Like they will ask, like, are you stupid? Or asking those challenging questions. And this is very, very common when person's emotional brain takes charge. The second reaction is refusal, refuse to cooperate or follow. Even though we give those options, they're just like, no, no, I don't follow that. Just want the original unmet needs. And sometimes it escalates to an emotional outburst where the person is, expressing their emotions, their thoughts, venting. But remember, they are not causing any imminent or immediate harm to others or to themselves. So that is a release, the emotional outburst or the intimidation, making threats to themselves, to others, or maybe to the staff. It doesn't mean they're being non-respectful. It's how their emotional brain respond. When they are fully charged with emotions, they can't think rationally, and those are the behaviors when they are triggered or their thinking brain is losing control. So those are the behaviors at the expression level. So what can we do? Listen with empathy in the alignment arc. First thing first, we mentioned about remain non-judgmental. We don't take those comments or those challenging behaviors personally. If the person is asking the challenging behavior and they're trying to put you into power struggle, they want you to take the baits. We don't follow that pattern. We filter those challenging behaviors, go back to the original unmet needs, and we don't answer those challenging questions. And most of the time, they're not looking for answers, honestly. Let's say, for example, when people ask you, like, are you stupid? How can you sleep at night? Do you think the person are actually looking for an answer? So mostly, we can just filter those comments, go back to the original unmet needs. Allow time for silence reflection, and paraphrase what you understand. I can see that you are overwhelmed, you are anxious, and go back to the unmet needs and paraphrase. Ask open questions. What, where, when, how, which, but be careful on asking the question why. Because when the person is, flipping the lid, when we ask the why question, you can still ask. Just be careful. For example, if you want to know the reason behind their behavior, even though you really want to know the answer, when you ask, why did you do this? To them, it perceives like you are questioning them. So you can ask the why question. Just be careful. And then acknowledge their feelings, not opinions. I can see that you are frustrated. I hear you are anxious. I hear you are overwhelmed. So acknowledge their feelings. Most of the time, it's not just the issue itself, it's how the person feel, their feelings. So acknowledge their feelings. It's a great way to de-escalate. So here I have a quick video to show you. It's a quick video to tell you the difference between empathy and sympathy by Brene Brown. It's a wonderful video. I think some of you may have seen this before, but for those who haven't, I just quickly show you this one more time. It's only 3 minutes long, so this gives you a quick understanding of the difference between empathy and the sympathy. So I will turn on the subtitles and switch it into, oh, I hope I can put it into French, but seems like I'm not allowed to do so. Let's see. There you go. Okay. So I'm turning on the French subtitles while the audio is in English.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay. Right. So what makes something better is the connection. Sometimes we don't know the answer, and we are not the problem solver to solve all the problems. Having that connection is essential. So we're not looking for perfection or give guidance, directions. We are looking for connections and help the person. Overall, they know themselves the best. We just bring their attention back, their thinking brain back, so they can make a more rational decision for themselves. So we don't push them to talk about or we give them recommendations. This is what you should do. So coming back to those alignment arc, 5 considerations. I'm always sharing this. From a person-centered approach, these 5 are the most overarching response. Thinking about the age, the cognitive functioning, People process emotions differently in different speed. We don't assume they follow the same time frame. Thinking about their previous life, their culture, their gender identity, not just gender, and previous life experience. So similarly to our five fingers, we can do this together. So first we have the age, the cognitive functioning, the culture, gender identity, previous life experience. Okay. So with that in mind, let's move on to the strategies for redirection. When we say we offer those short, simple statements to offer choice, to clarify boundaries, to thinking about positive behavior, I think folks may ask me, like, so what can we do? Like, what is the best approach? Actually, we do have three recommendations for you. So here, the following are the three strategies. The first one is called interrupt and redirect. The second one is called desired behavior, desired outcome. And the third one is called fail-safe choice. So what does it mean? Let's start from the first one. Interrupt and redirect. That means we interrupt the person's emotional flow. They are losing themselves in the emotional flow, but we want to get their attention back and redirect them to a positive behavior. So either invite them to take a breath with you. Remember, it's easy to say, but hard to do. We don't want to say like, calm down, take a breath. And they just like become a magic wand and they follow you. How we say the word means a lot. Rather than say like, oh, calm down, take a breath. We can say we invite them to take a breath with you. Yeah, I've noticed you're upset, you're anxious. Shall we take a breath together and tell me what has happened? The other one is bring their attention back to the present using their name and also start with I statement rather than like, oh, you look terrible, you look stressed. But we bring that attention back to us, use that I statement. So here I have two recommendations, like scripts that you can just easily follow. First thing first, pronounce their name accurately. That is the most beautiful words to help the person to de-escalate. For example, Song, I've noticed that you're upset. Shall we take a breath together and tell me what has happened? So I hear you, or I understand what you said. We don't say I understand a whole person, it's impossible. I understand what you said. Let's have a seat and we'll see how I can help. So bring their attention back to the present and provide other redirection. Clear, simple, tangible actions. And we don't use a flippant comment. Sometimes when we say, oh yeah, I understand your frustration, I understand. To them, they're like, no, you don't understand. So we narrow down our response. I understand this issue. I understand what you said. So the second one is called desired behavior, desired outcome. So this helps the person to identify the behavior that will help them reach to the desired outcome. So for example, so when you lower your voice, then I will be better able to address your concerns. Or, so I can see you're upset and I want to help. If you can wait here, then I can get the information you need. So again, that's the desired behavior, desired outcome. We're not talking about negative or punitive consequences. Like if you don't lower your voice, then I will call the security. And sometimes the person will escalate to the next level or confronting with you. Oh, call the cops, call the security. Oh, what? I don't care. Send me back. So thinking about the desired behavior, desired outcome. So it's a better way to help them de-escalate, come back to composure. Their thinking brain comes back. And the third one is called fail-safe choice. So this provides the person with two acceptable options for a request, just to show our empowerment. So the person knows they have self-control, they have those responsibility and authority. For example, hey Tong, would you like to talk about this now or later in private? Hi Tong, well, which would you like to complete first? Option A or option B? So we just offer the two fail-safe choice so the person can choose the one they prefer. But one thing to keep in mind is we want to be reasonable. When we offer those choices, remember, we don't want to encourage the person to repeat the same distress behavior just to get your choice as an award. So, what does it mean? For example, if you see the child or the student screaming or yelling on the street or in the school, and their parents is like, if you stop yelling, I'll give you $5 to buy your candies. What will happen in the future? Frankly, yes, the kids stopped yelling, screaming, but you just embed that path that a person will repeat the same distress behavior just to get your option as an award. So when we offer any options, we have to reasonable. We don't want them to repeat the same behavior again. So those are the three best approaches according to study, either by desired behavior, desired outcome, interrupt and redirect, and fail-safe choice. At the end of this PD session, we will give you a pocket guide. So it includes with everything we learned so far and also the scripts. So you can just take it, read it quickly before you support the person, even during that conflict. The other part I want to share is, during that conflict moment, we want to make sure we have those self-regulation in the crises. I call this about, ABOUT. Ask for help. You are not alone, and we can also be proactive. If there is a conflict or there's a situation you feel like you don't have the capacity to help, let your coworkers know. You are not alone, and you are not to exposed to all the situation by yourself. Breathe. The breathing exercise is the most powerful tool. And study has showed that having deep breaths will remove your anxiety, activates your vagus nerve, and make sure you don't react with when you are fully charged, you flip the lid. And that's why we always say like take a breath because honestly, it helps, really. So if the person cannot take deep breaths, please, let's take deep breath. Observe the person. What are they communicating? Verbal, nonverbal, paraverbal. What are the unmet needs? And the you, ABOUT, you means use grounding. We may lose ourselves in those emotional flow. So bring something back to the present. Have like a pressure ball or squeeze your toes on the ground just to feel the gravity. Put something like on the chair or use the five senses practices. Just bring your attention back to the moment so you don't lose yourself to those emotional flow. And last part, think then say. Sometimes you're just so close to say those hurtful words, but you know what? If we can take a pause and think positively, how am I communicating? What am I expressing? Am I aware of my implicit bias? Am I having those judgments as preconceived ideas to get in the way? So that is a perfect time for you to pause and think then say. So overall, those five recommendations are again verified by research. ABOUT will extend your capacity to self-regulate in those crisis moments. And last but not least, let's move on to the learning arc. So we've go over the whole PEARL one more time. So the last piece is about the learning. So when we say strategies at the learning arc, it includes the three parts. Not only during that present moment, but also try to understand the past. If we have that opportunity to talk with a person when they are reaching to that, their thinking brain comes back. They're coming back to composure, they started to apologize, they feel embarrassed, remorse. So those are the signs that their thinking brain comes back. So this is a perfect time for us to understand, hear from their perspective, what happened, when and where. Those triggers might happen way earlier than we have aware of. And take time to gain our so support the present. We don't rush them to talk about that incident. We address those immediate and basic needs and take time to gain your own calm and ask for help if you need. So that's the part we support the present. We don't rush them to talk. Address those immediate basic needs like water, food, clothes. If you know the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you will know the basic needs is the foundation. If we cannot meet the basic needs, it's impossible for us to de-escalate. And take some time to gain your own composure and ask for help if you need, and then understand the past. So we hear from the person's experiences, when and where did it happen, and confirm those triggers, just to understand from the person's perspective, what are the unmet needs that caused escalation. And then the last part is to plan for the future. What will help you feel settled when you are stressed? So ask for the person, ask the kids, the students in your care, what can I say or do to help? And thinking about our conversation, what are some things that didn't help? And also for us, for both the staff and for the client, how to build their own resilience. What are some self-help strategies that helped you in the past? It could be either a professional help. Some of them or most of them don't have professional help. So thinking about the community help, do they have a trusted acquaintance to talk, family member, community member, sometimes spiritual leader or peer support? So those are all community support we can refer to. And thinking about their self-help strategy, like when you are stressed, what helped you to stay regulated? So we don't assume we know the person. So once again, plan for the future is the part we have those debriefing conversation. What will help you feel settled? What can I do or what can I say to help? What are some things that do not help? So that's a part we're aware those strategies is not working and build our own resilience. So with that in mind, the last piece I want to think about is the learning arc consideration. Thinking about the age, the cognitive functioning, the culture, the gender identity, and their previous life experiences. Again, similarly to the person-centered approach. When we support the person in the learning arc to understand that conversation, we're always thinking about the age piece. Support the youth, the teenagers, the adolescents, to adults, to senior. Their cognitive functioning level is different. Especially for the youth, the teenagers, their thinking brain is not well developed, so they may easily flip the lid and communicate with their emotions. And that's a part that we'll step back to objectively analyze what they're communicating. What are the unmet needs? And thinking about the cognitive functioning, remember, not everyone process emotion in the same speed. And thinking about their cultural background, there might be some taboo, some stigma to talk about some of their situations. And also thinking about the cultural difference, the gender identity, not just gender, and their previous life experience. So all in all, that is the end of our Pearl arc one more time. So we have that pressure, then the expression, we align our approach, will be the positive influence to de-escalate, and then also how to react and redirect the conversation and learn from that conversation. So all in all, this is the complete Pearl arc that will help you not only in your daily conversation to your clients, but also to your daily life. So I hope this skill can help you in the future. I'm taking the time, so the last but not least piece, we'll bring you into a quick self-study. We will assign this exercise just for 6 minutes, just to do a quick role play activity to use Pearl Arc. We're not role playing to win the Oscar. We are practicing those role play in a more safer space, just to go over those process. and the skills you learned so far. So what I'm going to do in a few seconds, I will ask Olivia to create small groups of threes, to thinking about the situation where a client shows behaviors at either in the pressure or the expression arc. It could be because of an unmet needs or a difficult conversation, or sometimes it could be a request like they do not follow. And in your group, let's assign your roles. So we have groups of threes. So one person will be the person in distress. Just respond to the situation by showing some behaviors at the prepression and expression arc. Then the staff member thinking about the support the person behavior using the alignment and redirection. And then the observer just take some notes and provide some constructive feedback to your group. So given the time we have here, we'll just assign 6 minutes for this exercise, thinking about one conversation or one behavior and go over the pearl arc we have learned so far. And if you're not comfortable in role plays, that's fine. Those 6 minutes will be your self-reflection. Share some high takeaways with other peers. That will be also a great self-reflection component. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm checking the time. I want to make sure we wrap up the training on time. So let's put you into groups of threes and start our role play exercise. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you have a quick exercise to go over the Pearl arc. Again, this is just the beginning of our long-term support to the people in our care. And again, we may not have sufficient time for you to go over, but this is a great time just for you to understand, like to apply the skills we have learned together today. So to summarize, when we have those emotional conversations, especially with in our care, for our clients, to summarize, I want to say the high emotion communication, as we all know so far, is not a failure. The emotional realities of our SWIS work is obvious. We're supporting the students across the multiple crises. We're navigating the family stress. We navigate the school expectation, the system barriers, also the emotional fatigue from us, the constant empathy and responsibility, and sometimes the invisible labor of the relationships we built and the cultural mediation. So with that in mind, to summarize, the high emotion communication is not a failure, and we can make a huge impact. All right. So to wrap up the training today, the PD session, I hope you'll have some great exercise, some learning pieces. So the last part as a takeaway, just to take a moment to bring your senses back to the moment, give you the flexing. Uh, Thinking about the 5 things you can see at the moment, then bring back to the 4 things you can feel, the 3 things you can hear, the 2 slow breaths, and also the one strategy that you will take with you today. Okay, so that is a closing reflections and grounding. Thank you so much for spending your full morning with me during the March break. And feel free to connect or send any questions to me. As you know, I'm an immigrant. I worked with our immigrant serving sectors. I have my education lens, and I am passionate in delivering more trainings so you have more skill sets to help others and also to yourself. So with that in mind, enjoy the rest of your day. Have a wonderful March break. I will see you around until next time.